Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Artist Showcase for Ceramic Printing for All. This is a booth inside NCECA, and there are two organizations. One is CerPrint by Rosetta Technologies. They are the sponsor of this morning's Artist Showcase with Justin Rothshank. The other one is Enduring Images. They will be presenting a showcase tomorrow morning with Mariko Patterson. Rob Huller is president and founder of Rosetta Technologies, where they engineer microprinters, toner, and software used by businesses, credit unions, financial institutions, and banks to print or process checks. He likes to say at one time in the way back, he also made a decent living as a studio potter on Cape Cod. His current passion is making a line of affordable ceramic decal printers designed for studio potters, glass artists, enamelists, schools, and universities. We call it CerPrint. Morning, Rob.
Thanks, Karen. It's so nice to even virtually be doing NCECA again. I know we all missed it last year. I always have so much fun at this conference and get to meet existing users and new people and students and teachers. It's a great experience. So today we're really lucky to have with us Justin Rothshank, and I'm sure probably a lot of you, if you don't know Justin, have probably heard his name in the world of ceramic decal art. Justin is a studio potter working in Goshen, Indiana. He's really in demand. I think he has a very busy schedule as a presenter, a panelist, a visiting artist, and artist at residence throughout the United States and abroad. Justin's functional and decorative ceramic ware is available for purchase in more than 3 dozen galleries and gift shops around the United States. I mean, I'm lucky enough to have a few pieces of his that he gave me. And his ceramic work has been exhibited and published internationally in Ceramics Monthly, American Craft, Studio Potter, and the Logbook. His work is in numerous public and private collections around the United States. Museum collections include the High Museum in Atlanta, Georgia, the Frick Museum in Pittsburgh, the Museum of Fine Arts in Springfield, Mass., the San Angelo Museum of Fine Arts in San Angelo, Texas. If you're interested in learning more after our Zoom, check out his book and video, Low Fire Soda, which I'm a proud owner of a copy of that, published by Ceramic Arts Network, and his instructional DVD entitled Ceramic Decals, New Ideas and Techniques, published by Ceramic Arts Daily. So welcome, Justin, and thank you very much for joining us. It's nice to see your face after a hiatus of over a year. So I understand you're going to show us your process for using decals and take us on a tour of your studio. And so I'll turn this over to you. If any of you out there have questions, I don't know, do you raise your hand?
One question that's already come in. Please give
Barbara.
the name of the DVD one more time.
I just saw that. So Barbara, that's Ceramic Decals, New Ideas and Techniques, and that's published by Ceramic Arts Daily. Okay, Justin, over to you.
All right, thanks, Rob, and Karen, thanks for setting this up. It's nice to be back in the workshop mode, I guess, after a year packing it in at my studio. So there may be a few cobwebs to rub off here in the demo world, but I'll do my best. And fortunately, I get to be here in my studio in Indiana, and I don't teach a lot of workshops out of here, but this is where all my equipment is. So it's the best place to show you what I do. It's where all my decals are, all my printers, all my pots. So like Karen said, if you have questions, type them into the chat. Hopefully at the end, there will be opportunity to answer questions. Today, I'm going to talk try to focus the talk specifically on the CerPrint Black printer that Rob helped develop. There's loads of other decal processes, and I use all of them. But that's not what today's about. I'm going to demo the black decal transfer process. And then, like Karen said, tomorrow Mariko's gonna demo the how the four color printing process works. So if you have questions on that, she's way more qualified to talk about that than I am. And I don't actually have one of those. I just have the black printer. Rob recently added blue toner to that possibility, so it's the same process for black or for blue. But I think I want to show you around the studio. I think it will help give context to what I'm doing. I think it helps to show that there are lots of different ways to use ceramic decals. One of my favorite ways is layering. And that sets up sort of a foreground background imagery process, and also then involves multiple types of decals in order to get a sort of unique result. So my studio is in Goshen, Indiana, which is the northern part of the state. We're about 2.5 hours east of Chicago. I live in a rural area, and my studio is a 2-story building. So I'm going to flip this around and just show you around. I'm in the showroom here, where I have finished work stored and where I prepare for shipping. But also this is where I do my decal printing. So where I pack all my pots. I use that machine for packing. And here's the decal printer that I'm going to talk about today. The CerPrint 3500. And I work off of a MacBook Pro. So I can have that hooked up and be relatively mobile. I am not a very technology savvy guy. So if I can make this work, I think you probably can too. I have tried over the years to avoid technology when at all possible. But if you're making decals yourself, I think there is some level of technology that needs to happen. I work with Photoshop to lay my decal pages out, and I work off of imagery that I find on the internet that's fair use, or I design my own stuff either in Photoshop or with a good old Sharpie marker. And I also happen to be married to a painter and illustrator who helps draw a lot of things on my behalf. So my wife is an illustrator. A quick sample of how we've utilized the CerPrint with her work. This is a porcelain vase with a black and white drawing of a daffodil. You can see on there that's been made with a black into a black decal and then fired on. So my wife did the illustrations, and we did this series of drawings using that CerPrint printer. Few other things to note. Actually, let me flip this around again. I have used a lot of the pre-coated paper. So this is the low fire decal paper that Rosetta makes, and the high fire decal paper. And Rob just told me, actually, while we were getting started on this meeting, that he's switching over to the laminator process primarily. I know over the last couple of years, especially, decal paper, it's just constantly changing. And in fact, it's always been the case that cover coat varies on all kinds of decals, and some cover coats can be really fantastic to work with. They're really flexible, really stretchy, really easy to transfer over, and other cover coats are just horrible. And then there's everything in between. And I can imagine I'm not making the product myself, but Rob's dealing with that on his end, and keeping consistency can be a real challenge. So I've liked the pre-coated stuff and have not ever used the laminator, but I have several friends who do. I know Isaac Shu is working with color ceramic decals. He's a potter that some of you may know out in Kansas, and he uses a laminator with great success to print his decals. So anyhow, that's a little bit off topic, but I will go back here to just quickly to talk about laying out a decal sheet. This is how my sheets look in Photoshop, the raw image. You can see that it's laid out in black, and then when I print it, it'll print in either the black toner, or if I have the blue cartridge in the printer, it'll print out in blue. I always say that when I'm laying out a decal sheet, it's just trying to pack as many images on the sheet as possible. You get to use the scissors to cut it apart. So it doesn't matter if they're laid out in the proper format for how they look on the pot. It's just a matter of getting them printed on the sheet. So these are a few sheets that I have prepared for my work. And I think I will head downstairs. My studio is like I said, a 2-story building. We've got a gray day outside. So this is the view out of the back of my studio. That's my wood kiln out back. And out front here, we're on the ground floor. So if you give me about 30 seconds, I'm going to walk downstairs. Here's a few more of those black toner vases, and I will get down to where I actually make the pots. And here's a sort of a brief tour of my studio. I do a lot of glazing in this corner. Many pots that I make start with a real basic, boring white glaze. So you can see here's a kiln load of pots. There's a black glaze. We glazed them all yesterday, waiting to go into the electric kilns today. When they come out of the kiln, they're all just white, real boring white, and perfect for decals to add all the imagery. I have set up here a decal station, always in my studio. So that's about 15 linear feet of counter space where I just spread out decals. I have, you'll notice that there's no wet clay here. There's never wet clay or dry clay here because I want a nice clean surface to put decals on, away from as much dust and dirt as possible. One of my favorite tools is this big white basin full of clean water to soak decals in. So again, that is not the basin that I use when I throw pots on the wheel. That's over there. So the dirt stays over there, and this stays nice and clean. I also use these sponges that I get from Trader Joe's. They're called pop-up sponges, and I find them to be fantastic for applying decals. I get them wet and then wring them completely out, so there's no water left, but they're really nice and firm, and they can serve as a great squeegee for getting the wrinkles and bubbles and other things out from under the decal film. A few other tools that you'll notice laying here on the table: favorite pair of scissors for cutting stuff apart, X-Acto knife for trimming when I need to, a real fine trimming process, garbage can for throwing away the backer paper, which is part of every decal. And then everything else is really within arm's reach. You'll notice I keep a decal inventory of all kinds of other decals. Now, to be clear, these are not printed with the Rosetta printer, but designed and printed elsewhere. This is a custom color decal that my wife drew for me and then I had printed in bulk. These are poppies. You of course see those on all kinds of my pots. And then all kinds of floral imagery that I source from decal catalogs. These are custom printed gold decals, gold, copper, platinum, all stored in plastic. And then they have this cellophane sheet in between so that they don't stick to each other. More decals here. So you can see here's more decals printed and stocked. So just all kinds of stuff. I have an image library that I can source imagery that I'm thinking about based on what kind of pots I'm making. And I find that that having that stuff close at hand, I really work intuitively. And so I could be doing a whole kiln load of pots and think about what design will work. And then as I'm cutting stuff apart, the designs evolve across that body of work. And to be clear, when I'm teaching a workshop in a school or a school setting, I often only bring one or two mugs to show this process. And that's all I'm going to show today. But that's not how I work at home. I decal a kiln load of pots at a time, 200 mugs at a time, because the kiln, I'm not just going to put one mug into the kiln. And, my kiln holds 180 mugs. And so I do that whole line of pots at one time. And I can keep consistent over each mug. So, if it's a production pot, say a mug with Dr. Fauci's face on it, I can do 200 of those and they're all identical. But if I'm doing something a little more expressive, I might see the decals evolve over the load of pots as I start to sort of entertain myself with what's possible. So I want to show you some samples of the Rosetta CerPrint sort of finished process. These are the blue ink printed on that printer that I showed you upstairs, and then this is the black ink printed and ready to go. I did several sheets here so I can cut stuff apart. And then here are some finished pieces, or partially finished. I'm going to finish them again. So this is the black fired to completion. And this is the blue fired to completion. And to be clear, this is iron, which is a different process, and you'll see that's brown. So the black really is black. Sets itself apart nicely. And then this is that same black, but layered over some color imagery. Same blue, but with a red poppy on it. So I'm going to show you how I do this here in about a minute. But these were just some finished pieces that I want to get to.
Justin,
Yeah.
there's a question from Catherine, and she says, does the black ink bleach out with clear glazes like sepia iron oxide decals do?
Not in my experience. No, the black stays pretty well black. The bleaching of any decal happens based on the correct temperature that you're firing to. And so if it's bleaching out, it's probably not the decal, it's probably how hot you fired it. Although it can shift based on the glaze that it's on. One of the reasons that so much of my production work and brightly colored work is on a low fire white glaze is that it's the most, that gives me the most vibrant, stable color across all styles of decal. Now, to be clear, I'll put a decal on anything. So I can put a decal on a wood-fired pot that was fired to cone 14 but the surface is going to be vastly different at the end than if I put that same decal on a low fire white pot. And you can put a decal on anything, but it's all about knowing the proper firing temperatures and where they mature at and how they're going to look. I have noticed with the black toner, it feels really vibrant and black, and you can then it doesn't seem to fire. It doesn't seem to lose its vibrancy as much the way the iron does when I fire it. And so if you want to shift the vibrancy so that it's less black, you need to do that in Photoshop or in whatever image.
You use a grayscale or something like that?
What's that?
You use a grayscale or something like that in Photoshop? You change the opacity? Exactly.
So you can do those adjustments there. I mean, you can do that with an iron when you're prepping for an iron toner decal as well, but the black really does stay pretty black.
Renee asks, is your work always low fire or do you go beyond cone 6?
I fire at all temperatures. Maybe that's a good segue just to say, I produce maybe between 5,000 and 7,000 pots a year. The vast majority of those are earthenware, and they're fired out here in these electric kilns. So yeah, fired mostly to cone 04, although the decal work then would be fired at a lower temperature yet than 04. So the highest firing temperature for those pots is 04. But I also, I mean, I have a wood kiln right here, sort of hard to see, and then up the hill I have a gas kiln. So I fire to all temperatures, ranging from 04 up to cone 12, and I use all clay bodies, ranging from earthenware to cone 6 up to cone 10 stoneware and porcelain as well. And I use decals on all of those pots. And so the thing that I need to keep straight is what temperature the decals need to be fired to be mature. I have found what I like the best with this black, with the black decal with the CerPrint. I fire those to 010, to that burns off the cover coat, so that there's not really a halo around the image, and it also then sets the image in a way that it's permanent, so it doesn't scratch off and it's permanently affixed to the surface. Yeah, so hopefully that's clear. I think one of the hardest things with decals is really has nothing to do with how you put them on. It's keeping all the information straight, because there's so much that can vary based on firing temperatures and glazes and clay and all of that stuff. Actually putting the decal on is perhaps the easiest part of the whole process. And I'll show you that right now, I think, unless there's other questions that have come up.
Nope, that's it so far.
Okay, so let me try to flip this around and I'll see if I can work, or actually, yeah, let me flip it around and I'll see how this works here. All right, so like I said, right when we got down here, I start with just a white mug, and as you can see here, there is nothing on it, completely bare white. Just to outline the firing steps, this is a red earthenware clay. It was bisque fired to cone 04 in an electric kiln. And then it was glaze fired to cone 06, also in an electric kiln. So this mug now has been fired twice, bisque firing, then glaze firing. And now I'm preparing to add the black decal to it. when I get the decal ready, zoom out here a little bit. I'm just going to cut this apart. And I have found that occasionally this cover coat, when you fire it on, it can leave a residual halo around that mimics the shape of your cut here. So it's helpful to make that cut in a visually pleasing way. And depending on what your end result is, you may even want to cut closer than what I do. What you may have heard me say earlier is that I have found firing to cone 010 that there is no halo. So even zooming in here, you can't really see where the decal ends and the cover coat ends and the glaze area begins. And that's what I want. I want it to look like has always been on there as part of the glaze.
So Justin, we got a couple of questions.
Okay.
One is, does CerPrint fire best with a straight cone setting, or does it require a specific firing program? And then the second is, can you even do decals on pit-fired pots, it sounds like?
Well, so the first one, I fire to a cone 010 setting. I use a Scott kiln with a computer digital programmer. And so I just use their 010 setting. In fact, I could not even tell you what temperature that is. It's temperature 010 in my head. So that's what I use. To clarify, I fire everything at a slow firing rate. Again, that's the pre-programmed slow rate that Scott has developed for their programmable kilns. They have a slow, medium, and fast. And I like the slow. It allows time for the organic materials that are part of the cover coat, or if it's a glaze or bisque firing that are part of the ceramic materials, more time to escape. And I found that limits the pinholing that happens in my glazes at the end. So I stick with a slow rate. And then there was the pit firing. Mm-hmm. Related to decal application, it really works best on a glossy or at least semi-glossy surface. So if your pit-fired pot is burnished and has a glossy or at least semi-gloss surface, I think the decal would stick. To clarify, the thing that keeps the decal onto the pot is that adhesive that's on the back side of the cover coat, and that works really well on a semi-gloss surface. It tends to work really horribly on surfaces that are totally matte. There's really nothing for the decal to stick to. However, if you can get it to stick, the pigment will stay because it's a ceramic pigment. And so actually I have a sample over here of some pots that are getting ready to be bisque fired. I did these yesterday. These plates have not yet been fired. It's raw clay. It's completely bone dry. And that's the CerPrint Blue applied, but it's a plate. So there's really nowhere for that pigment to go except down onto the plate. So when it's bisque fired, the decal should stay there and be there at the end. And you'll see, I mean, you can see the cover coat there is all wrinkled and terrible. I mean, it's like the worst quality transfer that you can imagine. And as you might imagine, the image, the quality of that image is going to be really distorted at the end, but it'll still be there and you'll be able to make it out. So it's possible to do that. The thing that you lose is quality of transfer. And so if you're trying to transfer a love note, to your significant other, you may not be able to read it at the end. But if you're just trying to transfer, some background imagery that's maybe setting up future composition, it can be a really great way of getting more tones in and define it in a little better way. So hopefully that makes sense.
So the next question is really basic. They're asking, are the decals food safe, and can you put them on the inside of a plate or bowl, and should they only be hand washed? That may be a question more for Rob, but
yeah, Rob,
I'll leave it
throw
up
that
to you
one over
guys.
to you.
Am I on?
You're on, sir.
Oh, cool. Yeah, thanks, Justin. This is fascinating so far. Yes, all of the decal materials, including the pigment, are food safe. So the decal material that we use primarily contains a flux. So when you fire it, as Justin is talking about, to like 010, 011, you have a hard, vitreous, food safe, dishwasher safe ceramic piece. Now there are some low fire decal papers out there that use lead as a flux, and we used to have an unleaded one. I think Justin, you have the unleaded, and because of COVID, that's not available yet. I'm waiting for that company to start up again, but I don't know if COVID absolutely killed them or what. But that fires around 1200 Fahrenheit. So I think that answers the question. Thanks.
And this one's for you, Justin, definitely. What white glaze do you use? I guess they're looking for a specific recommendation.
I use a couple different whites. The one that you're seeing is a low fire white from Standard Ceramic Supply. And I also use several of the low fire gloss whites from Amico. And I don't use it regularly, but I've used the low fire white from Mako as well. Any of those low fire white gloss whites are good. Back to real quick on the food safe one. I should say that, like Rob said, there are some low fire decals that especially of commercial quality, that they recommend not. I hesitate to call them not food safe. They recommend putting them on the outside of pots, and putting them away from where you might put your lips. And to be clear, and in addition to that, there are some decals that contain gold and gold luster that you can certainly use with food materials, but because they're fired at such a low temperature, the more you use that piece, similar to like if you have your grandma's china in your cabinet, that gold or pigment, colored pigment, is going to eventually wear off. It's not going to wear off after your first or second or even 50th dinner, but over 20 years or 30 years, you're going to see that, especially the gold or the platinum or the copper, start to wear off. I have not experienced that at all with the Rosetta printers with the black ink, because at firing them to 010, I'm actually getting the decal to sit into the surface of the glaze, and if I rub my finger across the image, there is no texture. It feels the same as if it was I'm putting it on the glazed surface. So that there is a difference in that respect, and the Rosetta is sort of firing right into that glazed surface. Okay, so back to applying this. I already soaked these while we were talking, which I think I didn't mean to do that, but anyhow, I'll throw another one in. I have this clean bucket of water. Drop the decal in. I like to use warm water. It feels better on my hands. I live in cold northern Indiana, so I don't want cold water. Cold water would work if you're living down in Miami, I guess. It will take a little longer. If the water's colder, it will just take longer for that backer paper to separate. And what you're waiting for is for that backer paper. You can kind of see here. Let me get my hand free. What you're waiting for is for the decal to begin. Hang on. Do this one that was soaked a little longer here. I didn't let that one soak long enough. So you're waiting for it to separate and start to slide around on the backer paper. And you can see how hard it was for that one that it wasn't ready. So I just need to put that back in the water for another 3 seconds and it should be fine. Okay. Now when I apply the decal, I don't usually do this with a phone in between me and the surface, so it's a little bit awkward. You can see all the wrinkles there, and that's where I start using the sponge. And it's really hard to do this looking through an iPhone screen, but I'm going to do my best to work all the wrinkles out. And what I'm doing is pushing the wrinkles to, like right here, that wrinkle doesn't matter because there's no pigment there. So it doesn't matter if there's a wrinkle, but the wrinkle over the black there, I want to try, to squeeze that out, or, you know, sometimes they tear like that and then I just smash it back in. That one looks good. So I would call that good. I'm less concerned about major wrinkles in this pattern than I would be if this was RBG's face, where it really makes a difference if you've got an air bubble on someone's nose or eye. Let me just put one more on here. Now, you'll notice that I'm putting these on with the printed ink is on the outside of the paper, and the paper is sort of between the ink and the glazed surface. I'm doing that out of habit. I think Rob wants you to do it the other way, but I know that both ways work. You can invert, so let me do one the other direction. This decal got all torn because I pulled it off too quickly. So both processes will work, forward or backward.
Yeah, I discovered that, Justin, by accident, that it works both ways.
Hey, Rob, somebody asked about, are the decals microwave safe?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, if you were using, say, a gold luster, you would have some fireworks in your microwave. My mother left us a beautiful Syracuse china set. That one of them was absolutely fried because it had a gold luster around the rim, and she hated cold plates, so she put them in the microwave, and it burned that luster right off around the rim.
So Justin, if you have a wrinkle in the clear part of the decal, it just burns out. It doesn't leave a bump after the firing.
That's right. The wrinkles, I mean, all the cover coat. I mean, the fascinating thing about decals is, as important as the cover coat is, it disappears when you fire it. There's nothing left of that cover coat outside of the pigment that the cover coat was carrying onto the surface of your pot. And then some of the cover coats, I guess, are fluxed, but that flux only stays where the where the pigment is. So yeah, you can push, I always push the wrinkles to where there's no pigment.
And David wants to know about layering with multiple firings. I think you talked about that briefly earlier.
Yeah. So let me get these blue ones on.
Okay.
Also, you'll note it is not uncommon for me to tear a decal like this. I just patch them back together on the surface. I mean, if it's a face, I would start over and probably reprint it. But if it's an organic composition, I'll just patch it together. All right, so I've got these blue and black are printed or are applied. Let me just set these out of the way here. And then once they're fired, they come out, they look like this. So it applies like this. I put it in the kiln and I fire it to cone 010 on a slow setting. And when I unload the kiln, it looks like this. And this is where I can begin more layering. So these are a low fire decal. The reason I do the layering is that this 010 is a hotter temperature than what the red poppy needs to be fired to maturity at. So I need to get that 010 firing out of the way. And then when I want to apply the red decal, I can fire that, and I fire that to this is the temperature I do have memorized. 1412 degrees Fahrenheit. It's about 015 in the kiln, but I do fire to a specific temperature. And now I can come in and apply these to create sort of the foreground imagery. And I'm firing between layers, like I just said. So now this would go back into the kiln. I would fire it to 1400, approximately 1400 degrees. And then when it comes out, it's going to look like this, although this is the blue one, fired on.
How long do you let things dry, Justin?
Well, probably you should let them dry for a day in between. I don't always do that, but that's what you'll get the best results at, is 24 hours of drying. Now you can also do more complex layering. You know, you'll see, I don't know if you can see RBG's eyeball showing through there. I make this line of political pottery, and very occasionally I'll get an air bubble on someone's eye or nose or mouth, and I can't sell that. So then I'll come back and I'll set up a little bit more imagery over top. So you can see how faint that is. What I did was I dipped that in white glaze and started over. And then I applied these color flower decals and fired it again. And then now I can come back and put this on. To obstruct that mistake even more. And you can obviously do this without making a mistake first to hide the mistake. You can just do it intentionally, which I also do, to set up these multiple layers of firing in between.
Once a decal dries, can you remove it before firing if you don't like the position, or do you just manage to slide it around to
once they dry on there, they're pretty, you can remove them, but you're going to ruin the decal. You'll need to chip it off with like an X-Acto knife or your fingernail, or wash it with a scrub brush in the sink. it'll destroy the decal, but it'll come off. So you can layer, so I could fire this now, but I can also go ahead and add more decals right on top of it. And the interesting thing with decals, and not unlike glaze or clay, is you got to get to know the material. And so I can put a decal right over this other decal, and it'll leave pigment behind, but it may not be an excellent transfer. So you can layer at any point in the process, and I do that. But every time you start to layer, you do risk losing the quality of the image in that layering process. So the more cover coats you have built up in between pigments, the more likely that it is that those cover coats are going to cause pigment to burn away, or air bubbles to develop, or a poor quality transfer to occur. But that's not necessarily a reason to not do it. Some of those results can be really interesting. So I do that quite often, building up layers. Here you can see a flower that's less vibrant because it's been fired and then glazed over and fired again, and then a vibrant decal applied on top of it. And so that, to me, that creates, again, more background and foreground imagery. It's like when you look at a garden, the flowers that are 15 feet away from you are less vibrant than the flowers that are right under your nose. And so you're setting up that depth of field that enables you to think about layering in a different way. Same kind of thing happening here. You can also do things like, with the CerPrint, you can fire I fire them to 010 on earthenware, but I also, I fire them to cone 10 in my soda kiln. You can overfire them. It's going to be less vibrant, but it's still going to be there. So you don't always have to follow the rules that Rob or anyone else sets out for you. What Rob's trying to do is tell you how to get the best, most consistent result, and then repeat that regularly. And what I'm trying to tell you is to learn that information and then do the opposite to see how you can be creative with it. Because both options are going to work. Here's a sample. I think I sent this picture to you, Rob. Here's a black mug fired to cone 6 in my soda kiln, and a black decal. What's really awesome is it started to turn green.
Yeah.
And what you might also notice is that the cover coat is that squiggly line right there. So where the cover coat is, it must have been a fluxed cover coat that I used. Where that cover coat is, it attracted carbon in the kiln and created this really fascinating halo around the decal. So there's this change in vibrancy. Now, some people might look at that and say they don't like it, which is totally fine. And other people might look at it and say, wow, that's really worth exploring. I could use that, in a way that might cultivate interesting results later. So this mug that I'm showing you here was created in the exact same fashion that this was. I applied the decal on bone dry clay when the cover coat looked really wrinkly and nasty like that, and then I put it in the soda kiln and got this result here. So I would encourage you to follow the rules when you're starting out, because that's really, you need to know that information and then build on that. But once you get that information logged in your head, then you can extrapolate from that and start exploring these interesting new avenues for development of new ideas. That hopefully that covered the layering. I don't know if the person that asked about layering was satisfied with that.
That's great information. Thank you, Justin. We've got about 5 minutes left, and we have a giveaway to do. So I'll send that to Rob. You want me to send it to you so you can make the announcement, or do you just want me to tell everybody who won?
You're in the catbird seat, Karen, so you go right ahead.
Okay. Well, Melissa Getty, congratulations. You have won a CerPrint Black printing system. Make sure you stay on the line with me after so that I can get your address and all of your mailing information. Congratulations. I am going to, I think, as you can go through and unmute yourself, we've got a few minutes. If, Justin, you have a couple minutes, we can have people unmute themselves and ask a question. And Melissa says, OMG, thank you so much. Anybody have a question for Justin?
If I
Larry, okay.
Jump in. This kind of went right by me, so this might be a question that is self-evident, but I'll ask it anyway. I'm really, the last part of your demo where you showed how you get that depth of field, I want to make sure I understand that. So maybe you could just explain that really quick? That went right over my head, but I love the effect of the way those flowers became kind of background and then the other flowers became foreground. But I wasn't exactly sure how you achieved that. It kind of went over my head.
Sure. Fortunately, I have some screwed up pots here in process, so I'll help to illustrate it. This is a mug. This mug that I'm pointing at is on my glaze table waiting to be glaze fired. And I'm gonna cause more work for me later, but you'll notice if I rub the glaze off, there's a decal already underneath it. Mm-hmm. That decal has been fired on.
And that's just a clear glaze on there at this point.
That's a white glaze. But because I've dipped it over top of an already glazed piece, it's really super thin. You can see there's all this glaze that ran off when we dipped it. Mm-hmm. So it's not a super efficient thing to do. But what happens then when that comes out of the glaze fire, here's another example. When it comes out of the glaze fire, that decal that was glazed over gets muted. You can see the muted decal right here. Uh-huh. Everything else looks, and here's even the red poppy muted. So it came out, and then I applied decals over top and did the whole process all over again. Okay. So what happens is, a conventional mug like this one, it was bisque fired, it was glaze fired, then it was decal fired twice. What I can do and it's finished, I can go drink my coffee out of it right now. It's totally finished, ready to sell. But I could also dip it in glaze and then start that whole process all over again. And do, another glaze firing and 2 or 3 more decal firings and end up with 7 firings on it. But that would then create this layered effect. Okay. So this mug that I'm holding right now has already been fired 6 times and I'm not finished yet.
So that's just you dip it, but I imagine one could try brushing over certain parts or whatever, right? I mean, there's...
Oh, totally. And if you were spraying, it would be even more efficient because the spray would work better. Yeah. And quite honestly, we dip, and sometimes I don't get, sometimes it's so thin that I'll actually dip it twice if I want to thicken it up and have an even more muted tone.
Was that just kind of a serendipitous discovery, or did you kind of go for that? It sounds like one of those things that just happens kind of like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah, when you're doing production, you make a ton of mistakes and they cost a lot of money if you can't figure out how to fix them.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so
Yeah. Well,
figured out how to fix the mistakes, and now I do it on purpose sometimes too.
Thank you.
Rob, one of the questions was, does the cartridge have a shelf life?
Well, the standard in the industry for toner, just sitting, is about a year. But so far, we haven't seen any issues with the toner deteriorating. So, I mean, right now, I would say it's probably over a year for sure.
Okay. And the side question was, how many sheets can you put through on a cartridge? That's often a question we get.
Okay, so obviously that depends on toner coverage. So you could have a lot of dense, black images, and your toner coverage by percentage goes up. But in my experiments, we get right around 500 8.5 by 11 decal sheets out of one toner cartridge. And that's probably 35% coverage. Obviously, if you're doing grayscale, you use less toner. If you're doing heavy blacks and all jammed together on the sheet, you're going to use more.
Yep.
The answer is around 500.
Yep. Any other questions? Going once, going twice. Okay. This will be, it has been recorded and it will be posted to our VFairs booth. And I will also probably post it to the website because we do have a YouTube channel. And thanks so much for joining us, everyone. And thank you, Justin, for sharing your decal process with us. The Zoom has been recorded. It's going to be posted, as I said. Please remember that CerPrint is offering a 10% discount on both our black and blue printing systems for all NCECA attendees through August 30th. You need to put NCECA in the discount code box online when you order it at CerPrint.com. Anything else, Rob, you and Justin want to add for the good of the order?
Well, I want to thank Justin and everyone who attended. Justin, that was fascinating to me to see you work. I mean, the variations are absolutely endless, as you've shown. And that's what I tell everybody, here's how it works the way I know it, but experiment, experiment, experiment.
Yeah, well,
go to Home Depot and get a box of 4x4 porcelain bathroom tiles and have at it.
Exactly.
Does.
Well, thanks for tuning in. I appreciate the opportunity. It's nice to talk to you all.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you, everybody.